hope there's something there that speaks to you. Find that quote. Find a way to use it, not just in a paper, but use it in talking about your life. Everything you're doing, the only way to stay in school, the only way school makes sense, is if you say, I can take this and use it in my life. Now, there's a lot of crap we learn in school that we can't use in our life, or we don't know yet how to use it. I can tell you that I did not like school most of my life, but I now like what I learned in a lot of those classes I didn't like. I began to realize, because maybe you don't use it right away. So then I went on and I wrote specifically about the gangster. I'm going to read you a little bit from that piece. I grew up in a little Italy outside Chicago, from where came many of Chicago's gangsters. I've had my share of encounters with real and fictional gangsters and know intimately the world of violence that surrounds them. Many of the men in my life have been violently killed. My godfather shot by a security guard in a robbery. My father brutally stabbed in a crime that was never solved, although I did solve it. And I'll tell you about that in a second. And my grandfather shot dead in another robbery. By traditional expectations of masculinity in Southern culture, I should have avenged at least one or two of those killings. I should have gone looking for the guys who killed. And I did. I went looking for the guy who killed my father, but I killed him in writing. The mob had already killed him 20 years before I realized it was him. From time to time, at crucial stages in my childhood and adolescence, I found myself actually faced with the decision whether or not to take the path that promised more violence. Since I had learned to live with violence, it became a way of life that was familiar. And like those who move into a home alongside the rail tracks, you eventually learn not to hear the noise the train makes. Violence was not only common, but expected. When people went missing, when people were found dead on the street, he deserved it, or he did something wrong. There was an explanation for it. In some way, I like to think of the research of my career, the writing, the public speaking, as exacting a more refined version of revenge, an attempt to refine masculinity. It wasn't until I was a few years into the study that I began to understand why, in spite of the horror this figure, the gangster figure, caused in my life, I continued to be attracted to the gangster. For Italian Americans, the gangster is a figure either to be ignored or emulated. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time in funeral homes. There were two people who could walk into a funeral home and everybody's head would turn around to see who they were. One was a priest, the other was a gangster. For Italian Americans, a gangster is a figure to be either ignored or emulated, and there was never any attempt to explain it to me as I was growing up. Nobody said, he's a gangster, stay away. He's Mr. So-and-so. And I can tell you, some of the strongest, most powerful gangsters in Chicago were as kind to me as my own grandfathers were. They were normal. So you begin to think that this is the normal way of life. These men have more power than the police. Why? Because they give money to the police. The police, if you tell the police this person's name, they'll let you go. Things like that. I began my own exploration, which led from the streets to the academy, from oral tradition to the written word, and that search began the moment I learned to read or write. And I can tell you, if it were not for reading or writing, I would have been a gangster. This I know for a fact. I grew up in the 1950s, where the only Italians you saw on television were either crooning love songs or singing like canaries in front of televised government investigations. The first reality TV that ever existed in the United States were government investigations into organized crime. In my Chicago neighborhood, we never played cowboys and Indians. Inspired by television programs like The Untouchables, we played cops and robbers. And none of us ever wanted to be the cops. While there might have been an Italian-American cop in our town, there were none on television. It's no wonder that many of us young Italian-American boys became so infatuated with the attention given to the Italian criminals that we found our own ways of gaining that notoriety and power. Now, that kind of explains how I went from, I began to find